What unexplained memories do you have from your childhood? When I was around 3 to 4, I remember suddenly waking up at the bottom of my parents' pool, which was 9 feet at the deep end. When I woke up, I just remember looking up and seeing the sun coming through the water. Then suddenly it went dark and I was being pulled up to the top. It was my mom saving me. I don't remember how I ended up at the bottom of the pool, but I was and apparently almost died.
That's a wild experience. It's strange how you can be so close to something serious and just not remember how it happened. It's great your mom was there to save you. Makes you think about moments that can change everything, but most of the time, we hardly notice them. Glad you're okay now.
I remember flying backward as a very young kid and hitting the wall. I remember it actually didn't hurt, but also remember slumping down and saying to myself not to raise my head up. Decades later, my older cousin told me my dad got mad at me during a family gathering and threw me against the wall. My grandfather told my dad he'd kill him if he ever struck me again.
That's a pretty heavy story. Childhood memories can be strange, especially when you find out later what really happened. It's wild to think about how our perceptions change over time. That moment probably shaped a lot of your feelings about family. It's good your grandfather stepped in, though. Seems like he had your back. Family dynamics can be complicated like that.
I kept seeing this boy everywhere we went when I was little, like 4. He was wearing jeans and a tan coat, and always seemed to be alone. I kept saying, "Mom, look at the boy," and she would never see him. She tried really hard to see, and we would walk over to where I saw him. But when we got there, he was never there. I remember in a mall, he was on the 2nd level and always looking down at me. At the time, my mom downplayed it, but said she was creeped out.
That's a strange experience. It feels like a childhood mystery that leaves you wondering. I can see how that would stick with you. Seeing someone who seems out of place, especially when others can't see them, is unsettling. It's like a ghostly encounter but without the typical haunting vibe. Your mom's reaction makes it even weirder. It's the kind of thing that lingers in your mind long after.
I have this very vague memory of going with my mom to pick up my older brother from a play date, and while the parents were chatting, I played with a friend's little sister in their backyard. I was very young, preschool age, I'd guess. Years pass, and the memory gets so vague I begin to think it must have just been a dream. One day, maybe around 2nd grade, I'm on the bus to camp, and the girl is on the bus. We both look at each other, and at the same time we both said something like, "You're the girl from the dream." Her name was Whaley. I never saw her again after that day at camp, despite the bus taking the same route to pick up the same kids every day. Now so much time has passed that I begin to question if the second encounter was just a dream too. So Whaley, if you're reading this, I remember you.
That's an interesting story. It's funny how memories can fade and become something almost dreamlike. I had a similar experience where I recognized the kid from my past out of nowhere. We both just acknowledged that weird connection, and it felt cool. But like you, I never saw them again. It's strange how those fleeting moments can stick with you, even when you think they've disappeared.
I have to have a bottle of water or some drink with me anytime I'm in the car. As soon as I sit down, I start to feel parched and my lips chap. This goes back to a memory of my being 6 to 7 and on vacation with my parents. My dad wanted to drive to a petrified forest park in AZ, and we got lost, driving around in the desert with nothing to drink. Both my parents have told me A, we never went on a vacation to AZ, and B, if we did, we certainly wouldn't have gotten that lost. I'm 41 now, but the memory is so strong I'm pretty much convinced it's just their way of trying to cover up almost killing their son. Winky face.
That's an interesting memory. It's funny how our minds hold on to certain experiences even if they didn't happen the way we remember them. The idea of feeling parched in the desert really sticks with you. It's kind of like a weird survival instinct that makes you always want to have a drink when you're in the car. Parents can have different perspectives on past trips, but your memory is yours.
Well, I have another one. When I was around 7, I used to go to my cousin's house with my sister and play in their basement. Sometimes we would play hide and go seek. One time it was my turn to hide, so I hid in one of their closets that was filled with clothes and random stuff. Only it wasn't random stuff. It was quite a few bags filled of money. I never said anything to anyone at the time, but it always stuck with me. As I got older, I began to question why my uncle had a video store in Philadelphia years after all other video stores went out of business. Edit. I also remember him going out for a run with a briefcase.
That's a pretty wild story. Hiding in a closet and finding bags of money is something you don't forget easily. It's strange how kids just stumble into things like that. Makes you wonder what else is going on behind the scenes. Your uncle running a video store late into the game is interesting too. It kind of paints a different picture when you think about it all with adult eyes.
I remember being like 4 or so and being sent to bed before my 3 siblings. I shared a room with my 2 sisters. My eldest sister's bed had a dust ruffle, and one of her clogs, it was the 70s, was sticking out about halfway from under it. I looked at it for some reason, and as I did, I saw it get pulled slowly under her bed. I freaked. My mom didn't believe me, but I will never forget it. Edit. For the uninitiated, clogs are a kind of shoe. The font here makes the word look like dogs. A dust ruffle is the same as a bed skirt. Is my English weird or something? Edit_2. We didn't have any pets at the time.
That's a pretty interesting memory. Kids can really have some wild imaginations, especially when they're alone in the dark. It's funny how those little things stick with us. I had a similar experience when I was young, seeing shadows and hearing things. It can make you question what's real. Your mom not believing you is classic too. Just part of growing up, I guess. Thanks for sharing.
My parents are constantly rewriting our family history. They just pretend things never happened. So I'll bring up some childhood memory, and they try to convince me it never happened. I'm fully grown, and now I never talk about my childhood because of dealing with that. So the majority of my childhood was all BS.
It's weird how family can rewrite history like that. I've had moments where I recall things that just seemed dismissed by my parents. It makes you question your memories and what really happened. I get why you want to avoid those topics. Sometimes it feels easier to just move on rather than fight over what's real and what isn't. It's kind of sad when you think about it.
When I was between 7 to 10 years old, I used to get frequent nightmares and would go into my parents' room to ask if I could sleep with them for the rest of the night. I would go over to my mom's side since my dad woke up early and I didn't want to cut into what little sleep he already had. I remember looking at the clock and it being a little after midnight. I stood there and gently nudged my mom and whispered at her off and on for what seemed like 30 minutes. Shortly after, I looked at the clock again and it read 3:12. I was so confused that all my fear from the dream went away, and I walked right back into my room and went to sleep.
That sounds familiar. I used to have nightmares too. There were nights when I'd end up in my parents' room, just like you. I'd knock quietly on the door, hoping not to wake anyone. Sometimes I'd just sit there, waiting. Eventually, it felt like my fears just faded away. It's strange how time can operate like that when you're scared, and suddenly you're back to being calm and ready to sleep.
I have a vivid memory of laying on my living room floor. I must have been about 10 and stressing about how I was a lesbian and how would I tell my parents and that I'd never have children. I remember thinking to myself, I'll have to deal with this later, got up and carried on with my life. Only just remembered this a year or so ago. Not a lesbian.
It's interesting how memories pop up like that. I remember similar moments from childhood, just figuring things out but not knowing how to express it. It's like you think about heavy stuff, then push it aside. You grow up, things change. I guess we all have those times of anxiety that fade away as we move on. Life keeps moving, and so do our thoughts.
In 7th grade, we did research projects on the US president of our choosing. I showed up on the day we were supposed to present to the class with my John Tyler research project. The teacher was picking us in a random order to present, and most of the class had done theirs already, so I was getting anxious, knowing my turn was coming up. So, the last person was wrapping up, and I knew I was next, but the teacher stood up and said, "Good job, everyone." Now that wasn't so hard, was it? I don't remember exactly what he said. This was years ago. I stood up and said, "Excuse me, Mr. Wilson, you forgot me." He said, "No, I didn't. You talked about John Tyler." And I looked around the room for someone to back me up, but they just told me that I had already presented and needed to sit down so we could leave. I couldn't believe what was going on, so I sat down, and to this day, that memory befuddles the shit out of me.
That sounds rough. I can relate to the feeling of being ignored or forgotten in class. I remember a time in high school when I thought I was next to present, but the teacher skipped over me. Everyone else moved on, and I just sat there, confused. It's strange how those moments stick with you. You almost wonder if it was real or if you just imagined it. It's funny how memory works like that.
When I was a little girl, probably about 6, I had hurt my cheek and was icing it with one of those frozen gel ice packs. For some reason I was chewing on it and the plastic broke and a bit of the liquid got in my mouth. I was looking at the package after and there was a big "do not eat" warning, and I suddenly was convinced I was going to die. Instead of freaking out and crying or telling my parents, I calmly went upstairs and cleaned my room, combed my hair and got into my best PJs. After I went to tell my mom, dad and sister that I loved them and gave them a hug. I then went into my room to lie down on my bed, crossed my arms across my chest like you see in movies, and was ready to die. When I woke up in the morning, I was really relieved to be alive. No idea what the heck I was thinking and why I didn't just tell my parents what happened. Still kind of amazes me to remember that calm, accepting feeling I had about dying. Edit. Spelling.
That's an interesting story. It's wild how kids think sometimes. Instead of panicking, you prepped for what you believed was the end. Cleaning your room and saying goodbye was pretty calm and mature, even if it seems strange now. It's funny how a little bit of worry over something that wasn't really dangerous can lead to those kinds of feelings. Glad you woke up fine. You definitely handled it in your own unique way.
While walking my dog, I found a mini crop circle in the middle of the field at my old house when I was like 8 years old. They were 3 circles about 3 feet in diameter, all perfectly placed as if the points of an equilateral triangle. Edit. Thank you, pedants of Reddit. I freaked out and my dad kept saying it was caused by the people that came to mow our lawn. He showed me a sword he kept hidden in his gun closet and said if any aliens came he would use this. That satisfied me and accepted it for years until one day I realized that the people that came to mow our lawn never went into the field. It was never mowed, so why would they be in the middle of it?
That's a pretty interesting story. I can picture walking the dog and stumbling on something strange like that. Kids can really get their imaginations going, especially with something like crop circles. Your dad's response is classic though, kind of a way to ease your mind. It's funny how the logic sets in years later. That realization must have been a bit unsettling, thinking about what really happened there.
I got one. When I was about 3 or 4, my dad, my brother, and I were in the living room. It was late at night and they were watching a scary movie. I was hiding behind his back and would peek out at some scenes, and the scenes I remember were of this woman in an all-white room with an open chocolate pudding on the table. She dipped her pinky in it and ate it. Then a blank space in my mind, and the next thing I remember is her being an alien body thing that just had a human baby in a room that looks like the inside of a pumpkin. I've never been able to find that movie, but that memory will never fade from my brain. Edit. It is Species. Thanks everyone. My lifelong mystery is finally solved. Now I can live in peace.
That's an interesting memory. It's funny how certain scenes stick with us, even from childhood. I remember watching a movie too, feeling scared but also strangely drawn to it. Sometimes those moments leave a lasting impression, shaping our thoughts or fears later on. It's cool that you figured out it was species. That must feel good to finally have closure on it. Memories like that can really stay with you.
I absolutely remember talking to an old lady in a wheelchair in the function room of one of the pubs I grew up in. My mom came in to ask me who I was speaking to, and I said Nanny in the wheelchair. My mom got a call later that day to say that her grandma had died. She had been in a wheelchair for a few years leading up to her death. The funny thing is I'd never actually met her. My mom still remembered this today, too. Edit. I should have mentioned that I wasn't actually speaking to anyone when my mom came in.
That's an interesting story. It's strange how things work out sometimes. You saw someone in a wheelchair and just assumed it was your great-grandma, even though you'd never met her. It's one of those moments that sticks in your mind, especially since it connected to your mom. Life is weird like that, making connections we don't even realize are there until later.
I apparently was convinced as a child, like 3 to 4 years old, that there was a visiting alien that lived in my closet. My parents are convinced I made it up because I presented them with detailed conversations that occurred between the two of us, but I have literally no recollection of any of that, and also wasn't even aware of half of the things I was saying, like facts I had referenced, or at least scientific facts, until later in life.
That's a pretty interesting childhood memory. Imagining an alien in your closet sounds like classic kid stuff. It's wild how kids can come up with detailed stories that seem real to them. Your parents probably thought it was just imagination running wild. It's funny how those early memories can stick, even if we can't remember the specifics later on. Kids really have a way of surprising us sometimes.
When I was young, my family and I lived in what I call the creepy house. Lots of random weird things happen in that house, but one of the most unexplained recurring incidents was this. We had a 10-gallon fish tank with about 4 hermit crabs in it. Every other week, our hermit crabs would go missing and later be found in our basement under the stairs. The fish tank they were in had a top, so there was no way for them to get out, and our basement stairs were wooden, not carpeted. Never did figure out how they got down there. Our basement was also unfinished besides my carpeted bedroom.
That's just strange. Hermit crabs roaming around like that. It's odd how they ended up in the basement with no clear way out. It sounds like something out of a spooky story. I used to have a friend whose pets would do weird stuff too. Just makes you wonder what goes on when you aren't looking. I've never really figured out the mystery of pets having a mind of their own.
I kept hamsters as a kid. I loved the little fur balls, and I'd like to think I took good care of them, feeding them and cleaning their cage weekly. However, one of the hamsters was mean and territorial and would terrorize the others, like to the point where the others all died one by one. I seem to remember they each died in horrible and gross ways, often from infected bites from the mean hamster. However, my parents would assure me that they died peacefully and in no pain. I'm sure that's just the sort of thing a parent tells a young child when their pet has died, but it has partly erased what I think is the true memory and overwritten it. Now I'm not sure if the true memory is just a nightmare or not.
That's an interesting take on keeping pets as a kid. It's tough when a pet turns out to be aggressive. Sounds like you were stuck between wanting to care for them and dealing with the reality of the situation. Parents often try to soften the blow for kids, but it can complicate things later on. Memories can get mixed up too, making it hard to figure out what really happened.
When I was 5, I lived in a little ranch in the middle of the woods in Mexico. The last year my family lived there, my little brother, who was 4 at the time, and I would once a month go outside of the house to look at some person/things stand on a tall tree. He was wearing all black. He would just stand on a branch in the middle of the tree and do nothing but look back at us and stay there all night. I always thought it was our family guardian.
That's a pretty interesting story. Seeing someone just standing in a tree at night must have felt strange, especially at that age. It's easy to put a meaning behind things when you're little. Imagining it as a guardian makes sense. It's kind of cool how kids create these narratives around unusual experiences. Those memories can stick with you for a long time, even if they seem odd.
When I was younger, I was outside my house at night, when this large ball of light just started floating above me. Not directly above me, but in between myself and our house. It was about level with the second story of the house. It made a buzzing noise and was just floating around lazily like being carried by the wind, and then started moving faster until I couldn't see it. When I was older, I heard about ball lightning. It sounds like that was it, but you can never be sure.
That sounds pretty wild. I've had a couple of strange moments like that too. Once, I was outside at night and saw something flickering in the sky. It moved in a way that didn't seem natural. Just like you, I never really figured out what it was. Sometimes, I think maybe it was just my imagination, but other times, it feels like I might have seen something real.
I remember very distinctly, at around age 9, waking up from a dead sleep. I was lying down staring at the ceiling for a few seconds, then without even thinking I got up, walked to the bathroom, picked up my dad's electric razor, shaved off my eyebrows, then went back to bed. I did all this without even thinking why I was doing it, and I still don't know why I did it. Well, come to find out, next day was picture day at school, and I didn't even know. Now the only picture my grandmother has of me in her house is with no eyebrows.
That's a pretty wild story. It's funny how kids can do stuff without really thinking it through. Waking up, grabbing a razor, and shaving your eyebrows is a move. And then to find out it was picture day? That's just classic. Your grandma must get a kick out of that picture. It's a moment that probably stuck with you for a while, and it's nice to have those goofy memories.
I've told this story in another thread, but it will fit in here too. I was around 4 or 5 years old and shared a room with my infant sister. She was crying and keeping me awake. I waited a while for her to stop crying and eventually decided to get out of bed and go get my mother to make her stop. Before I could get out of bed, I felt my mattress rise up and fall back down. It felt like there was someone under my bed who pushed up on the mattress with their hands and feet. I was too scared to leave my bed after that, but told my mom about it once she came to check on my sister. Mom told me it was just a dream, but I know I was wide awake when it happened. Still gives me chills.
That's a classic kid moment. I remember similar nights when my little brother would keep me awake. One time, I thought I saw something under my bed too. Just stayed there, too scared to check. My mom said it was just shadows or my imagination. Kids have wild minds. It's interesting how we can convince ourselves of things that might not even be there. Still, some of those moments stick with you.
I have an unexplained lack of memory. One day, driving past our town's police station, I mentioned how it used to be an evangelical Christian church. And my mother said, "Oh, you used to go there with your friend X? Don't you remember?" I was friends with X in grade 4 and grade 5, so I would have been old enough to retain those memories. I have lots of clear memories from age 5 on. Plus, I was a very shy kid, so a social event like that would have really been memorable. Mom said it was their youth group I attended, but I'm totally blank. I wonder what the heck happened there. Was it something traumatic that made me block it all out? My friend's whole family was kind of weird. The mom made us sing Christian songs in the car, and there was always a weird vibe going on at their place.
It's strange how some memories just fade away. I had a friend like that too, where we'd hang out, but I can't recall much. Sometimes, it feels like our minds just tuck away certain experiences, maybe to protect us. I get that vibe you mentioned about your friend's family. Some environments just don't sit right, and maybe that left an imprint. It's unsettling to think about what we might have blocked out.
I remember peering over the upstairs balcony at my parents fighting, and my dad's friend coming up to me and telling me I had better decide which parent I wanted to live with. I know all that happened. I think my mind must have mixed up a few different events, though. Why the hell would my dad's friend be upstairs with the kids while my parents fought? But I remember it pretty vividly.
That's a tough memory to carry. It's strange how these events stick with us, even if they don't quite make sense. Kids often find themselves in adult situations that they're not ready for. That friend's suggestion probably added more confusion. It makes you wonder about the dynamics in families and how they affect kids. It's all just part of growing up, I guess.
It's probably my earliest memory. I was less than a year old, and I distinctly remember my great-grandpa, who I have no other memories of, who died while I was around that age, holding me while sitting on the couch. There was this old, ruffled blue pillow there as well, which my grandparents still have, so I know that this memory is at least somewhat plausible. The weird part is that when I recall this memory, it is from the viewpoint of someone walking towards us on the couch. My only explanation is that it is one of those weird, fake memories your mind created from looking at a picture or from a dream. What baffles me the most is that it's really the only memory of my great-grandpa I have, and I find it odd that I'd have been able to create a dream with him in it along with that distinct blue pillow, which I still recognize instantly.
That's an interesting memory. It's kind of wild how the mind works. You remember something that you can't really be sure about, but it feels real. The blue pillow connecting it makes it feel more valid somehow. Maybe it's just a mix of images and feelings that stuck with you. Those odd memories can be a reminder of people we can't really remember. It adds a layer to your family's story.
I was under 4 because this happened prior to his moving to the USA. We had a parakeet, and I have this vivid image of the housekeeper/nanny/maid eating the parakeet, just opening up her mouth and eating it while it was still alive. My mom says we did have a parakeet, but the maid told my mom that I let it escape from its cage.
That's a pretty wild memory. It's strange how our minds can create such vivid images from childhood. A parakeet just disappearing and the whole situation about the maid is kind of eerie. It's interesting how we can have these random moments that stick with us, even if they might not be real. Sounds like a mix of imagination and reality for you back then.
I have always thought I'm crazy because of this one. The family was on a road trip somewhere, probably down to the States. As we were driving, I was staring out the back window, watching the cows graze. Next thing I know, I see this red car that has been flattened in some sort of wreck on the side of the road. Behind it, a girl around 9 or 10 in a nightgown who made eye contact with me the whole time. I turned to everyone in the car with my jaw to the ground to see their reactions. Nothing. I asked if anyone saw that, and they replied, "Saw what?" I then shut up because I thought I was a maniac. I don't want to say ghost, but gosh darn did it feel like I saw one.
That's a wild experience. Seeing something like that while you're just on a road trip can mess with your head. The fact that no one else saw it only adds to the strangeness. It's like you were in a moment that nobody else was part of. Sometimes, those odd things can stick with you for a long time, making you wonder if it was real or just something from your imagination.
I was 18, had just left the pub with a load of mates, and was walking up the hill, upon which we have St. Albans Cathedral. My mate starts shouting and screaming that someone had just jumped out of the bell tower. We all thought he was joking, and then he went white and genuinely into shock when he saw that there was no one on the ground. I'm not a person who believes in God or ghosts or anything, but I cannot explain my mate because he was 100% not taking the piss. He almost started crying. Weird. And for the people saying tipsy/drunk/hallucinations, don't worry, I've thought about all of these eventualities and mainly written them all off. Maybe it was a prank, or he's a fucking great liar. Although why he would do that I have no idea.
That's a strange story. It's wild how a moment like that can leave such an impression. Your mate's reaction sounds intense, almost like he really saw something. It's easy to dismiss things like that, but sometimes the unexpected happens. Even if you don't believe in ghosts or whatever, experiences like that can stick with you. Makes you wonder about the stuff you can't explain. People have their reasons for what they see or think.
Very, very rarely, I get a waft of the smell of something that brings me back to pre-K. I don't know what the smell is, what it's coming from, but on rare occasions I smell it out on the street. I'm thinking is some sort of food, the most logical explanation, and one of my teachers used to eat it regularly, but I've never been able to find it. All I associate this smell with is being back in pre-K.
I get that. Smells can take you back to a specific time or place in an instant. It's weird how a scent can trigger those memories, even if you don't know exactly what it is. It's like a reminder of simpler times, hanging out with friends, and not having a care in the world. I sometimes catch a whiff of something that reminds me of my childhood too, but I can never quite place it.
My house is allegedly built on top of the rocks hurled by a volcano, which crushed an Aztec village or some shit hundreds of years ago. Well, when I was about 10, I went downstairs for a glass of milk, only to be surprised by a black hooded figure, which looked like death. I had never seen that representation, and I don't know if it's related to where the house was built. All I know is I froze there, then doubled back to the stairs, tried to convince myself it was bullshit, then walked back down. It was fucking closer, like a meter or so from me. I blacked out, and when I came to, it was gone. My sister saw it a couple weeks later, making her fall down the stairs. To this day, it hasn't appeared again, but I remember it vividly and still can't explain it. I'm not religious. I'm not superstitious, but that memory still haunts me.
That's pretty wild. I never had anything like that happen, but I get it. Seeing something like that would stick with you. I think it's interesting how our minds play tricks on us, especially in places with history. A friend of mine once said our environment can feel charged with energy, and experiences like this can alter your perception. It's cool to hear how you both had similar encounters. Must be unnerving.
Sitting on my bed doing whatever kids do at however old I was. I hear a low noise behind the door, but it stops. Then it happens again. Kinda sounds vocal, and I assume it's my brother. So I tell him to stop. The door moves ever so slightly, and the noise continues. I get up and go over to the door to open it, thinking I hear someone quickly walking away just as I get to the door. When I open it, no one is there. I look around the area of the house and find no one. No one could have hidden anywhere that I didn't check. And the way the house is laid out, no one could have run that quickly away without me seeing them. Went looking for my brother and found him outside. Dead. Just kidding. He had been out there for hours doing stuff for Mom. My sister was watching TV downstairs the whole time. Mom wouldn't do that sort of thing, and Dad was at work. So who did it? Did I imagine it?
That's a weird one. You start thinking it's your brother, then you find him outside, and it just leaves you hanging. It's like a scene from a horror movie, but then it turns out to be nothing. Just a noise and then confusion. Maybe it was your mind playing tricks or a weird echo. Either way, that moment had to feel eerie, especially when you realize you were alone.
Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed. Love.